I would like to introduce you to a fairly new technology, blockchain, and how it's going to change our current world. But first of all, it's important to establish an intuitive understanding of what blockchain is to understand what this technology is capable of. So basically, blockchain is a publicly distributed, decentralized, synchronized, and encrypted database. But what does that in fact mean? Most importantly, blockchain is a public database with no dedicated centralized server. Instead, the database consists of a public network of servers which interact with each other in order to form the database. This causes the database to become both decentralized and distributed, which causes the data to be shared among the participants in the blockchain. But technically, how does this work? All the participants in the blockchain contribute to forging a new block consisting of data whenever new data occurs which needs to be stored. This process will be proceeding as long as the respective blockchain still receives new relevant data. All the forged blocks will have an affiliation to the previous block based on an encrypted value, which is based on the data and the previous block's affiliation. This inheritance of information concerning the previous block is referred to as a hash value. This system makes it impossible to change a previous block's data, since the following blocks of data then would be incorrect if no corrections are applied to them. Corrections can only happen if more than half of the blockchain's compute power delivered by the participants agree to apply a correction to the data. This makes it practically impossible for only one participant to change stored data, since redoing large amounts of encryption would require an arbitrary big amount of computing power. By looking at the final illustration, the block number 2 in the chain has a greater amount of encryption than block number 4, which means it would be easier to change the data of block number 4 if enough computing power from the participants wants to. This method of storing data may seem quite unnecessary compared to the traditional centralized method of storing data. The new approach becomes interesting when the authorities with the respective data is questioned. How are we as casual individuals able to confirm that our bank account balance is accurate? How are we as casual individuals able to confirm that everyone in the country pays their fair share of the tax? How are we as casual individuals able to confirm that our medical records are accurate and correct? The common answer for these questions would be, because we have trust in the authorities. But what if we don't have trust in the authorities? We aren't always able to check the data's legitimacy, and that is exactly why blockchain is a relevant technology, since it offers transparency for the participants, which increases the level of trust in the storing of the data. It might be difficult to see a legitimate need for such a technology from a Western perspective, since corruption is not a big issue. I would like you to take a look at the United Kingdom and the United States, who are respectively the 10th and the 18th country with the slightest amount of corruption compared to the former British colony Zimbabwe, who is number 154 out of 176. A high level of corruption affects the country's natural economy from functioning freely, which causes the entire society to suffer, which slows the overall national development and lowers the living standard for most people of the respective population. Therefore, blockchain might be the right tool to higher the living standards and development of countries like Zimbabwe, since the blockchain would counter the corruption, since stored data on the blockchain is practically impossible to counterfeit. But is this the optimal way to fight data counterfeiting? This approach requires unnecessary computational power for all the participants to receive, encrypt, and chain together in a practically irreversible way, just for the sake of transparency and trust. Therefore, This method is consuming unnecessary electricity, which contributes to the greenhouse effect. Suppose the energy consumed in the process is not produced in a clean environmental way. Cryptocurrencies, who relies on the blockchain technology, is consuming over 0.19% of the world's electricity. For instance, just a single transaction with Bitcoin demands the same amount of electricity as 8.5 American households' daily energy consumption. This is a great environmental price to pay for obtaining transparency and trust for, in this case, just a single transaction. We, as a society, would have to decide whether we are willing to pay the price of furthermore harming the environment, as well as paying for the great amount of computational power this approach requires. No doubt this technology would lower the authorities' data mistakes and overall raise their trustworthiness and simultaneously counter corrupt actions. But are we willing to pay the price for better data security and transparency? Furthermore, we would be required to consider whether we would like to implement this technology in our society, since it has only been used on a big scale in the context of cryptocurrency. So far, the cryptocurrency blockchain has been unbreakable, but what if a backdoor to the blockchain someday would be found? Such a backdoor could give undesired power to some of the participants, since the data is not restricted in the same way as it would be using a traditional centralized server for data processing and storage. These are all questions that would need to be answered before blockchain will be implemented in our society. But if blockchain eventually will be recognized as the better and preferred way of storing data, it would definitely have a positive impact on the world by bringing trust and transparency to the table. It will make us less dependent on the authorities and more independent, since the blockchain will take care of the data processing and storing. This technology will certainly affect the lives of the globe's population in one or another way.